Poštovani gledatelji DU-CHECK podcasta, naravno i slušatelji našega UNIDU radija, drago mi je evo da danas možemo se ponovno družiti, da možemo ugostiti još jednog predivnog sugovornika sa fakulteta u Floridi, Sjedinjene Američke Države. I'm saying hello to Andrew Selepak, professor. Thank you for coming here.
Thank you for having me.
We have very much in common, and we both have knowledge and expertise and long-term, let's say, university and also in media knowledge about the social media, the newspapers, the TV, radio, and everything that is happening. But today, people doesn't need to be on the university. It's enough to be online, and still they can understand all the processes that are coming. But it's always nice to hear from somebody like you that is really an expert in this field and that is having so much of that knowledge in front of you. So how are you, and how is to be here in Dubrovnik at first?
I'm doing well. I've been in the city for a few days now. It's my first time here. Probably you won't find many more beautiful places that I've ever been to than this town. Frequently I find myself just stopping, watching, stopping, looking, stopping, taking pictures, probably like most tourists, but then also sharing those pictures on social media, knowing that a lot of people that I know back home, students, family, people I work with, have not been here, and just to show them how amazing everything here looks. So it kind of combines both being here for the first time, being here, seeing everything, and social media of, you know, posting videos, pictures, stories, posts, everything else.
Are you usually looking forward to the social media about different countries and different things that you can find there and that you can learn from the new country?
Oh yeah, I mean, my undergraduate degree is in U.S. history. I love history. I love, you know, it was focused on American history, but I've loved European history. And, you know, American schools don't necessarily put a lot of emphasis on non-France, non-England when we teach European history. We get some ancient Greek, some ancient Rome, and then everything else is French and England. So I've learned a lot in terms of, you know, I'm one of the few people when I go to an exhibit or a museum or something, I'm actually reading everything about the history of. So, you know, going to Lokrum and reading about Richard the Lionheart and the Crusades and the monks and everything there. I love that. So for me, it's been amazing. You know, U.S., our history is, you know, 200, 250 years old. Here, 250 years old is something new. You know, like where everything else here is like, well, this was 2,000 years old. This is 1,000 years old. I'm like, I want to keep reading more about it. So it's been amazing for me.
But still, your knowledge is going very much in the future and in the modern art. When I was reading a little bit about you on the internet and finding little things in your biography, I found out that you are also having expertise and knowledge in the part of pop culture. And that was for me really, oh, this is my guy, because on the fifth year of university, the final work was about the British pop culture, popular culture, from the punk era in the 70s and 80s until the millennium in 2000. So this was one thing that I put like the only check mark that I have to ask you, but I know myself, if we go only in this direction, the 25 to 30 minutes will just vanish up, so we will just stay in all the other things. But when you are looking to the social media, it's all happening, as I told, on the mobile phones, tablets, laptops. We are all using it every day. How the things are working in America? I know there are some also legal things with the TikTok. I know the X, the Twitter before. It's very popular there, and here in Croatia, Twitter never had so much. It never gained so much popularity, but TikTok is rapidly like the main platform for the young kids. How are the things in America right now?
Well, you have, and a lot of things are, I mean, while there's a difference in culture, at the end of the day, young people are young people. And we're not talking about vastly different cultures. You know, it's been really, as an American, we learn how to speak English, and that's about it. I've come here, everyone has spoken English. You know, I've not had a problem with a single person, place where someone didn't understand me and couldn't help me. So I don't think it's vastly different when we talk about social media, because everyone here can understand all the stuff that's coming out of social media in the US. For us, you know, there's been a bit of a decline in Twitter, X, and part of that has been because the platform has changed a lot since Elon Musk took over. There's a lot more content creators who are being seen, whereas in the past, their content was throttled down, their content was shadow banned, their content was removed, often because of the things that they were saying when it came to COVID and COVID information. TikTok has exploded very quickly in the United States. Part of that was helped out because of COVID. You know, pre-COVID, if you look late 2019, early 2020, TikTok was still kind of a young person platform. But then when everyone was stuck inside, content creators were stuck inside, people wanted entertainment. There weren't new TV shows being made, there weren't new movies being made, but content creators were making content any and everywhere. And TikTok was a huge entertainment content creation platform, and it exploded. I don't know if TikTok would be as popular today if it hadn't been for COVID.
And do you think through that channel there was some misinformation, disinformation, maybe because it's not only entertainment, but the people are putting a lot of other things that are not only to make, I don't know, fun music or whatever, they're dancing on the TikTok. How that happened, and how those disinformations and misinformations made maybe difficulties in the medical department? Or
well, yeah, and it's, again, like for the US, we got COVID a little bit later than Europe. You know, in mid-March of 2020, for us, everything was we heard about COVID in China, we heard about COVID in Italy, but we weren't worried about it. At that point, TikTok really was still young people, you know, lip syncing, dancing, and it wasn't until we were on lockdowns in different parts of the U.S. where you suddenly started seeing users, brands, you know, content creators. That's where we started to get misinformation, disinformation. When it was just lip syncing videos and it was just dance routines, not a lot of misinformation in terms of a dance routine. But now it played a big part in the sort of the for the US post-2020 presidential election. It's playing a big role right now in politics. It played a big role in the midterm elections in 2022. Right now, the big thing that's going on there is content about Gaza and Israel. You can see reports that roughly about 80% of content in the United States on TikTok has been pro-Gaza, pro-Palestinian. Only about 20% has been about pro-Israel, Zionist. So that's really played out in our news media, talking about, okay, is this why young people are protesting? Is this why young people are protesting on college campuses? Because this is what they're seeing on TikTok. Whereas if they watch traditional news, they read traditional news, it's much more pro-Israel and not as pro-Gaza, pro-Palestinian. And that's where there's been a disconnect. If you look at polling in the United States, older people, much more supportive of Israel, much more supportive of what Israel's doing. Younger people, much more supportive of the Palestinians. And I think that has really put TikTok in the crosshairs of politicians, because the politicians, being older voters, older people, have been very supportive of Israel, and they're seeing that's hurting them in social media. So I think that's what's put TikTok recently in terms of legislation that was in the U.S. giving money to Ukraine, giving money to Taiwan, giving money to Israel, and including the TikTok ban.
When you touch the politics and the mid-elections and everything, I can remember that in one period I saw an information that Donald Trump, when he was banned, I think, from X or Twitter, that he will make his own social network. Did it ever happen? I never checked.
Truth Social. Yeah, it's called Truth Social.
Yeah, so it's working there.
And it doesn't have, I mean, it has probably roughly a total of 5 million users, not daily active users, but 5 million users. He, between his different court cases, he, to be let out on bond originally was going to be at close like $500 million, which he didn't have on cash. The judge lowered it, but one of the things was Truth Social basically had an IPO, and he got a lot of money from the IPO and was able to pay his bond. Trump really is only using, he personally is only using Truth Social. So media people have Truth Social accounts so they can see what he's tweeting. We see news stories where they report on what he's saying on Truth Social. He's been allowed back on to X, and really he made one post and that was his mugshot. He's been allowed back on to Facebook, hasn't been active on it, which has been surprising. But that may change as we get closer to the election in the U.S. We're still a couple months out. We'll see.
When I touched the theme of the subject of popular culture, I reminded myself right now that when I was watching, I think it was a documentary about Lady Gaga several years ago, and then I realized how normal it is for the big stars in America to have like an opinion and they sing for the politicians. Here in Croatia and in Europe it's not like usual, but when I remind myself about Pearl Jam, Bob Dylan, Bruce Springsteen, all of them, the rock stars, Foo Fighters, they had their people that they are in favorite for. How that is happening and how important are those persons and those stars in the popular culture and with the streaming media and social networks to promote those political views?
Well, and you mentioned mostly musicians, but Mark Ruffalo, who's the Incredible Hulk in the Marvel series, Robert De Niro, who's made not necessarily a lot of social media posts, but made media appearances. So it's not just the musicians; it's the actors, the actresses, the entertainment industry, and then even on the flip side, someone like Kid Rock, who's been pro Donald Trump, Joe Rogan, who is our most popular podcaster in the U.S., who's been a little bit more middle of the road, but sometimes leaning more towards Donald Trump. Celebrities often will let their opinions known, and sometimes, and in some ways that's good. They bring attention to issues, to diseases. In the United States, it's been very helpful to have a celebrity associated with a disease to raise money, to raise awareness. One of the most famous, Magic Johnson, when it came to HIV. But you have Lou Gehrig with Lou Gehrig's disease. I mean, it goes back decades. Celebrities being attached to causes and issues, Greta Thunberg with climate change. We have plenty of celebrities sometimes who associate with causes, and I think that often naturally transfers into politics and political issues because causes are political. You want to talk about climate change in the United States, that's a very political issue. You want to talk about even something as simple as should environmentalism and recycling, all that is a political issue in the United States, and you have celebrities who I think are making that transition from causes to politics and putting their thoughts out there, which sometimes can turn off their audience. When we saw with the BLM protests in 2020, a lot of athletes were involved in that and having their views expressed. It's very different from the pre-social media days. One of the most famous sort of ideas attributed to Michael Jordan was asked to kind of endorse a Democratic political candidate in North Carolina. And Michael Jordan being, at the time, the most recognized person in the world, if Michael Jordan endorsed a candidate, that candidate would have won, and people were upset that he did not endorse a Democratic candidate. And when asked why, Jordan said, well, Republicans buy, sneakers too. So back in the day, I don't think you had celebrities as involved in politics as you do now. I think part of that has been social media. Part of that is now it's a little bit more expected, so more celebrities are doing it. But if there wasn't social media, I don't think we would see it nearly as much as we do now.
And when we are talking about the audience and mostly about the social media, but still there is like the old newspapers, normal TV stations, radio stations. Do you think that the new generations are leaning toward mostly the social networks, or they're still having a habit? Maybe you can see it through the students. And how is that happening? If you have some statistics in the whole United States of America, when I went in that field.
Well, if you look at who's consuming traditional media, newspaper, radio, magazines, there's an audience, but the audience is older. If you look at who's getting their news and information from social media, older people as well are doing that, but younger people in particular. And what that means as far as looking at it from a natural perspective, those older people are a lot closer to death than the younger people. And that's where the traditional media still has an audience. But as they continue to die, there's really not much audience left for traditional media. And there's a number of reasons, I think, for that the American media landscape is very different. We don't have any state-owned media. Ours is very much advertising-based. So you have to have an audience. And if you don't have an audience, you can't pay your reporters, you can't pay your production costs. Newspapers all over the United States, local newspapers have been closing everywhere. TV stations are being bought by larger companies that are accepting profit losses to have those stations. Jeff Bezos purchasing the Washington Post, one of the most significant papers in the United States. That's becoming more and more, and as that's occurred, the traditional media has also become more biased, and they're leaning further left, they're leaning further right, which there's nothing wrong with that. Our First Amendment, freedom of the press, allows them to do that, but they're often not honest about their bias, which I think is a problem. Whereas a lot of people who are digital creators in the digital space when it comes to news, they're much more upfront, much more honest about their bias, their political bias, which I think the audience appreciates more, that sort of transparency of not projecting objectivity, but admitting a bias, and it's getting much larger audiences. If you look at our three major 24-hour news networks, CNN, Fox, MSNBC, their audiences continue to decline, whereas if you look at an episode of the Joe Rogan podcast, he's getting more people watching an hour of his show than the 24-hour news networks are getting combined for an entire day. And part of that's just because, not everything he talks about is news. It's not as much journalism. And instead, it's stories that are going on, but he's very upfront about what he's doing. And if we're being honest, journalism is expensive. If you send a journalist out to cover a story, that might be the only thing that they do that day. And they may not get sources to talk to them. They may not get to hear back from anybody. Whereas if you put a talking head on TV, it's cheap, it's easy, not a lot of production value. I mean, this isn't expensive for you and I to do this, but for both of us to go out and cover a story, go get sources, do research, interview multiple people, that's going to take a lot of time. And we might wind up with a 2-minute story, whereas you and I can sit here and talk for a half hour, costs nothing.
When we are talking about Joe Rogan and people like that in the podcast world. We all know here about Joe Rogan, and most of the people are watching his podcast even in Croatia. But what are the more prominent figures like him in America that maybe we don't know about, and still it's making like a popular opinions and having multi-million followers?
Well, I mean, there's probably one of the things to keep in mind is that there's also a lot of that when it goes on with sports in the U.S. and American sports are very different than the ones here, not just because of American football, which is far and away our most popular, the NFL, but then we also have college football, which is probably number 2, which also is not something that you see much in the United States. Maybe a little Germany, a little England, a little Ireland with American football. So part of it's football, but other people, you know, Bill Maher, who has a show on HBO, and a lot of his clips make it online. Jordan Peterson, who's a Canadian. I watch a particular show a lot. It's called Breaking Points with Sagar and Crystal. I taught the past year I taught a course on media and politics, and we watched clips from their show in my class so that students could see stories that weren't being covered by traditional mainstream media. Russell Brand, the British comedian, he has a podcast that gets a lot of views. Then there's entertainment stuff, there's sports stuff. It's all over, and I think, you know, those particular content creators, people are flocking to them because they're authentic. You know, America definitely post yellow journalism, post you know, the newspaper battles of the early 1900s, moving into this trained journalist, going to school to be a journalist, teaching objectivity, this new concept that really had never existed in the world, and that we were going to have objective reporters. It was something that I don't think exists as much as it was promoted in the past. And now we have very biased reporting, very biased reporters, and I think, again, allowed by the First Amendment, and I think the audience appreciates that when it's upfront and honest about the bias that exists. When it's hidden or it's not true, I think people have less trust in the media, and you can see where trust in the media has declined, along with all major institutions in the United States, labor unions, religion, academia, the news, the government, politicians, the banks. You know, our trust in everything has kind of declined.
And when you're talking with the students, when you are teaching them, are they more creators, or they're more like an audience that is following other people? How they are reacting? Because I know a lot of young people, but here in Croatia they're not so brave or moving forward in that direction. They're mostly just checking. And I know when I talk with some of the students here, even on the University of Dubrovnik, they were like, I don't want to publish it, I'm not sure, am I looking good, am I speaking okay? So there are not so many creators, there are not so many brave ones. How is the situation there? They are more open to that opportunity to record themselves and to put it online.
It's funny, I've been speaking to faculty here as well, and that's been true of faculty. I've been talking to faculty about the need to put their research out there for more people to see, for them to put their expertise out there for more people to see. And there's been kind of a feedback of like, I don't want the spotlight, I don't want the attention. As an American, we love the spotlight, we love the attention. You can't, you know, for most Americans, you can't get enough spotlight and attention. So I don't think I have many students, many people who are worried about creating content and putting content out there. Now, that doesn't mean it's not harmful, that there's not negative consequences to doing that, and that there's not negative side effects of spending so much time on social media, creating that content, and so forth. But I rarely see many students who have problems in content creation and putting stuff out there. Now, I teach media courses, I teach social media courses, I teach TV and film writing courses, sports media courses, entertainment media courses, reality TV courses. So my students that I have are more drawn to that. If I was teaching engineering students, not nearly as much. If I was teaching, you know, students in the, you know, statistics department, not nearly as much. But my students, this is what they want to do. And that's probably where I see a lot more of it because of the students I'm dealing with. And
how is the thing with their trust? Who they trust to people like influencers to podcasters or traditional media? Do you have any insights there?
It's honestly a little bit different. In my position, I teach students. Sometimes I see them in multiple courses. I teach them in multiple courses, different things. And I think for some of them, I probably have a little bit more of an influence on them than people who I might only get in one class. I personally, I tell them, I don't even have, in the US, I don't have cable. I only have the internet, which we have, more people in the US who are becoming cord cutters. So they don't have local TV, they don't have the national news networks. We get our news online, and I tell them, hey, this is where I get my news. I also tell my students that I have no interest trying to get them to vote Republican or Democrat. I'm not going to push them to vote Republican or Democrat. I just want them to know why they're voting Republican or Democrat and why they feel a certain way about an issue, and convince them, to go do research. And I, have different assignments. There's different websites where you can go and it'll say, okay, here's a particular story. Here's it covered from a left-leaning media organization. Here's it covered from a right-leaning media organization. Here's it covered from a sort of a centrist media organization. And I have them review the stories and see how it's told differently, see how the people interviewed are different, see how it pushes different agendas. And doing those types of things, I've noticed that a lot of times they're like, I knew this was going on, but seeing it seeing it presented in such a way, really recognizing how the media manipulates people, that I think at least the students that come through me enough and listen to what I'm saying, and you have a classroom of 40 students. Not everyone's going to be intently listening to everything you have to say, but you get them a second time, a third time, a fourth time. They start to listen more and more, and I think they start to recognize that for them to be an informed citizen, an informed voter, an informed consumer, because it's not just going into the voting booth. It's about when they're buying a product, when they're buying a car, when they're buying a home, when they're thinking about the job they're going to have, where they're going to live. Being informed means consuming content and knowing where to consume content. So I teach some media literacy. I teach them about misinformation, disinformation, teach them about deep fakes. I teach them about personal branding. I kind of have a couple topics, regardless of course, that they're going to get. So if it's my social media course, if it's my TV and film writing course, they're going to get media literacy. If it's my media writing course, if it's my social media course, if it's my sports media course, they're going to get personal branding, which is a little bit about understanding the impact of media. So I would like to think, I would hope that I do a good job. I would like to think, I'd like to hope that they're learning from me. I'd like to think, I'd like to hope that I am helping them be smarter media consumers. So we're going to go with just my hope and hope it happens.
We will hope for a good future, and I'm sure that those students will be big professionals in their way of living and, of course, working in the media. And our half an hour just vanished.
It went right by.
Yeah, we are almost at 30 minutes, so I have only 1 minute to tell you thank you for being here and to telling me all about the things that are working in the United States of America, and I hope so that we will have another chance to talk more about the popular culture and everything that I'm interested about.
Haven't talked about movies, haven't talked about music. Oh.
But I would take a time for everything other, so I hope so that this conversation was very informative for our viewers and listeners on the UNIDU podcast, so thank you, Andrew.
Thank you.
Poštovani gledatelji i slušatelji UNIDU televizije, UNIDU radija, bila je to još jedna epizoda iz ciklusa DU-CHECK-a. Andrew Selepak, profesor sa Sveučilišta na Floridi, Sjedinjene Američke Države, bio naš današnji gost. Mi se vidimo u idućoj epizodi.